In certain spaces, whether it's work or other social environments, sometimes there's a pressure or a need to put on a show for other people. And that can be tiring, especially in cultures where having that front is important and is a large part of how you spend your life or your waking hours. Then maybe people are more readily appreciative or acknowledging the need to retreat and just have that alone time where you can breathe deep, let down your guard a little bit, and just be your full non-performing self. Okay, hello. As you can tell, there are fewer humans on the couch today. Carol is in San Diego, her hometown, frolicking along the beach, and she left me here to hold down the fort. And so here's to holding down the fort together. Just kidding. She's home for a wedding, not hers. Otherwise, hopefully you guys would all know that. But it's just me, and I hope that's okay. And I thought that I would take this opportunity to talk about a topic that Carol and I have been brainstorming for a little while now. But this feels like the right opportunity to talk about it. And that is about being alone. It feels like a good opportunity to talk about that. And so Carol and I were chatting about it, what that looks like, especially in our 20s, in New York City, and how that differs across different friends that we know. And we realized that people think about this a lot. And so you may have seen, I sent out a poll on our Instagram story. And so thank you to everyone who responded. We wanted to just solicit more opinions around what aloneness looks like and feels like, and what the perceptions are around spending time alone. And it's really cool. I feel like both Carol and I were really pleasantly surprised by how many thoughts came in. And so we really appreciate it. And if you enjoy doing that, then let us know. And maybe this will be something that we do more recurring. And hopefully with the poll responses, we'll be able to represent a broader perspective than just my own on this topic. But with that being said, the genesis of this thought area came while I was solo tripping in London about 2 months ago. And I had originally booked the trip a couple months back with two kind of goals. One was that I had always wanted to live in London or some part of Europe. And even though this was only 11 days that I spent by myself, I was this is going to be dipping my toes in. And then the second reason tied to that was to kind of prove to myself that I could do it. I was debating between staying in a hotel versus Airbnb versus subletting versus a hostel. And I ended up going with a hostel, and I got a room that had 3 bunk beds, 6 people living together with a shared bathroom space. And then this was within a larger hostel with a common area, kitchen, living room. And even in just 11 days, I feel like my perception of myself evolved a lot. But my perception also of the world and what is around us and how we are formed by the cultures that we're in, the influences, the environments around us, what kinds of habits or behaviors or attitudes towards life or the world that the environment fosters inside of us. I felt a lot of those differences, living in London versus New York, versus back in the Bay. And maybe some of those anecdotes or examples will come up as we go. But again, I wanted to be able to capture as many different points of view on this topic as possible in the limited time before recording this episode. So that poll went out on Instagram, but I also DM'd a couple of friends for just their voice memo responses. And I'm excited to share some of those. And then I also called a friend, i.e. my sister, and her friend, and we chatted a little bit over the phone too. Generally along these lines of how people think about spending alone time, the role it plays in their lives, and how they think it's perceived in the world. So, without further ado, the first question that I had posed on Instagram and to these friends was, why do people sometimes feel uncomfortable with the idea of being alone or spending time alone? And a whole slew of different responses came in, but it felt like there were a few themes. One was an avoidance of something, or a fear of, like, if you were spending time alone, what that would uncover or what would come out. I'll pull up an example from my friend Eunice and what she told me.
When you're spending time alone, like, there's more, I guess, capacity and opportunity to be like faced with just yourself and all the things that you have either been avoidant of or have not faced or been too busy to face. Yeah, I feel like in moments of solitude, like for me personally, like things that I thought, I was either over with or like didn't, or I processed already, like they would always come up and sneak up on me in moments of solitude and alone time. Like everything that you're giving, like the input that you're giving to the people around you are like filtered. But then when you're by yourself and you're alone, it's uncomfortable because they're unfiltered. You're like faced with like everything that's like just bare.
Yeah, I liked the phrase sneak up that Eunice used. I feel like it's easy to busy ourselves. And I wonder if part of the avoidance of yourself comes from the fear of having thoughts that we had like neatly tucked away or compartmentalized unexpectedly sneak back up. The timing was also really cool that I had come upon a Substack blog. It's written by someone named Tamara. So thank you, Tamara. Shout out to you. She recently published a blog called Alone Finally. And yeah, it just had come into my feed this past week. But a quote from her blog was, "I have heard my thoughts purr in solitude in ways they never could in company. And it is not mysticism, but closer to acoustics. A crowded room is not a good listening environment." Yeah, and I think there's something telling about our fear around addressing our like rawest selves. Sometimes those like unprocessed thoughts, the open questions, the unresolved feelings. So a few people responded that way. Another area was just that we might be unpracticed or don't know how to spend time alone. This general sense of like, when I'm by myself, what do I do? I printed out people's responses from the Instagram poll so that I could read them out loud here without scrolling back. And one person was just like, I'm going to be bored. And then somebody else said, people don't know how to fill the silence by themselves. But I think there's something to be said there too, to wonder if like in our day and age with the accessibility of like our devices and digital media, if we are having a harder and harder time sitting still, being okay with just sitting and letting that be. Two other buckets of responses were more on like the logistical side. One was safety. And so someone mentioned like, especially if you're in a new country, there's logistics, there's language, there's like getting a SIM card. And so sometimes like having other people around just logistically makes things easier. It's more safe when there are other people. And then two people responded on Instagram too that you can enjoy more food at a restaurant when you go with more people. Like you can order more things off the menu and then get bites of each. Yeah, and sometimes there are just more communal experiences that are better enjoyed or easier to enjoy in community or with other people. But by far, the most frequent response to this question was the pressure or the social norms, the cultural norms, the stigma around not being alone. And for people who are watching on YouTube or on video, if you could see how long this list of poll responses was, these are all the responses that had something to do with how social and cultural norms have influenced the way that we perceive alone time. And so people saying things like, it's easy to feel like you're being judged because of social norms, the social stigma that being alone means not having people to do things with, the fear of being seen as vulnerable because it's not as as quote unquote cool to spend time alone. The fear of someone watching you or judging you when you're alone, more so than when you're with other people. The fear that people were feeling sorry for me. Just the general increase of feeling perceived, and being more self-conscious when you're alone versus when you're with other people. Somebody said that social media has pushed us to believe that some connection, even if it's shallow, is better than no connection at all. A lot of these responses had the words judgment, perceived, fear, anxiety. And I do think like when you're by yourself in your own thoughts, your self-consciousness can increase. But why is it that the stigma exists, like one person put it, that like not having people to do things with is bad? I have a friend, Allison, who I DM'd about this topic, and she gave a good example in her own life.
Good morning. I know for myself, when I was in middle school, I spent a lot of lunch times by myself, mainly because, I didn't have a lot of friends in middle school, and maybe like once in a while, one friend would come by, but then, he would have his other group that he would always go back to. So I think like being alone was linked to the idea of not being accepted by people, or it means that I'm unlovable, or not good enough to be with people. But so as I went out of middle school into teenager years and early college, I think I just had the idea of like being alone in public spaces, especially for me, was like weird and not normal, and it just means like, oh, everyone around me is judging me, kind of thing, for being by myself.
Yeah, and I feel like her example is interesting because it seems like for her case, early on, like in her middle school years, she already felt this notion of like, if I am by myself, then I am less than, or I am less liked. And especially as like middle school kids, I remember like I would be seeking the validation of my peers like constantly. And that has trickled into like later on in life too. That said, I was excited to ask Allien about this topic because she was raised in New York, but she now lives in Japan and has for the past 3 years. And we're talking about like this stigma, this cultural norm around being alone in the confines of Western culture, and specifically in America, in the United States, where most of these responses came from and where my own experience is coming from. But I've heard that in Japan, for example, the culture around being alone is very different. And so here's what she had to say about that.
Of course, that's not the case. Like, no one is judging you. No one really cares what you're doing because they're worried about what they're doing. And I think I grew more of that realization in Japan as I've lived out here. Yeah, Japan has a huge culture, actually, on being alone. They have, restaurants that cater to people being alone, just single stall ramen places. Like, it's kind of normal, I think, to see people, doing their own thing. I've seen people by themselves at Universal Studios. So it's quite normal here.
Can you imagine like seeing someone in Orlando Universal Studios by themselves? I think like the individual ramen stalls, for example, like when they first came to New York or to the US, is it called like Ichiran or that place? Like was such a abnormal experience here. And so people would wait in like long lines, of course, because the ramen was really, really good. But also like for that experience of like sitting on your own. That said, also culture changes and people evolve, and it's good to acknowledge the ways that we have evolved in our thinking around alone time too. And that is something that my sister reminded me of when we were talking on the phone. Do note that she was driving, and so you might hear some background honking and her turn signal and things. Do you feel like there's a social pressure or like a pressure in our culture to not prioritize alone time?
I'm sure there's like some like friend groups where there's pressure to not be alone. But I feel like nowadays it's like people are aware that alone time is healthy and that people need to recharge sometimes.
There was like that increasing trend of like taking yourself out on a date, and I feel like that was a good like counter-cultural type of thing, or like trying to break down this notion of like you always have to be with people. But I feel like the fact that there had to be a whole like social movement around taking yourself out on dates meant that it was previously being like something that was more looked down upon, like spending time alone. There's something to be said about like what we value in our culture and how that is perpetuated, encouraged, or discouraged, like on social media, for better or worse too. And maybe the last bucket of responses was this genuine, real fear of loneliness. I was chatting with Dion's friend who is in the car with her, so again, you'll hear some background noise. But here's what he had to say about it.
Why do I think people are uncomfortable with alone time? In my experiences talking to people post-grad, I think right now there's a lot of anxiety for some of my friends who have not built community for themselves. I think if they were very social before and didn't work on it, because I think also alone time is like a muscle that you exercise. It's a skill to know how to use it, know how to reflect and think, or to do things on your own. Like, it's not something like you're naturally born with. In the same way that being social probably is too. It's a different kind of muscle.
Yeah.
So if you don't exercise it, it's lost. And I think people who have exercised being really social in college or just throughout their life have underutilized the alone time muscle, I guess.
Yeah.
Is the way to metaphorize it. So it's just like, oh, new. I don't want to exercise that one because I'm not used to it.
True. Yeah. Yeah. I interviewed my pastor and asked her this question too, and here's what she had to say.
Why do people today feel uncomfortable with spending time alone? I'll say people don't want to feel lonely. I think that's a really tough position to be in, or to feeling like it's you and nobody else in this world is pretty isolating.
And it made me think, why is it important that we feel belonging? Back to Eunice, this is what she said.
But then when you're with someone, you kind of, there's this codependency on the other person to kind of ground you emotionally. And then also external validation and other things like that. But
Uni and I have also bonded over being psych majors together. And so I think we've spent a lot of time chatting about how relationships with other people inform our sense of self. On the other hand, my sister, she was an anthropology major in college. And so here was her take on why we have an aversion to being lonely.
I'm thinking so what happens when someone doesn't have that community?
Yeah.
Because community affirms you. Community can reassure you or push you in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is that a cultural thing, that we've put some of our identity in how other people think of us?
I don't know if it's cultural. It's always been a thing. I think it started with hierarchy and establishing leaders in a pack.
So maybe there's something inherent about us as humans that we seek validation from people around us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe it started with in order to be treated better or to get more food in a group, you had to be well liked. It was evolutionary advantageous to collaborate, and to be a good collaborator, you had to understand other beings, and to have people collaborate with you, you had to be well liked. So yes, it just kind of fostered social ability and connecting with people.
Cool. And so maybe there are cultural factors today, maybe there are evolutionary factors, maybe there's something in us being wired to seek validation from other people. Maybe there's the logistics around physical safety, or just wanting to enjoy experiences with others. And all of those coalesce into sometimes not feeling comfortable spending time alone. So after we established what the reasons are behind this discomfort around being alone or spending time alone, I then asked the people that I DM'd and then on Instagram how they go about spending time alone, or even what are things that you like to do more by yourself than with other people. And the two most popular responses were 1, going on a run or walk, and 2, TV, watching a movie, or watching videos on YouTube. I thought that Winnie, my pastor, had a very funny take on seeing the movies by herself.
Ooh, fun question. I would say for me, it would be watching a movie. Listen, it's between me and whatever I'm watching. I'm not really talking with anybody else. What's the point of paying in a theater to sit with somebody else and be silent as you both are watching a movie? So for me, I do enjoy just watching a movie by myself, and it's kind of like me and the directors having a dialogue. And I feel like that's more than enough people in that space.
Yeah, I followed up with her that is probably one of the hottest takes that I've heard on seeing the movies. And she also conceded that, like, of course, there's value in, like, shared experiences with people and then processing the movie afterwards. So we get that. But I appreciated her stance on it for herself personally. And here's an example from Uni on how she likes to spend her alone time.
Honestly, like the essence of my job is like just people, like kids and coworkers and teaching. Like you're always in constant dialogue and social exchange with other humans. So it's a lot at times. So I've been finding that like my most favorite thing to do is just like watch TV or like listen to music, or this sounds weird, but like also going to the gym, being able to like go on walks and stuff like alone is really nice. It like helps me clear my mind. And I think it's in those moments where I feel like at peace or content with being alone.
Yeah, one thing that she reminded me of was that in certain spaces, whether it's work or other social environments, sometimes there's a pressure or a need to like put on a show for other people. And that can be tiring. And Eunice is an elementary school teacher. And so it's hard to imagine jobs that are more demanding of your energy and your socializing than managing a whole classroom of very energetic little kids. But for me, I've mentioned this in other episodes, how a lot of my coworkers who are in marketing and sales perceive me as a pretty introverted person. And I think it's because relative to them, who are extremely like outgoing and social and chatty in the office, I seem pretty like reserved and quiet. And I think because of that environment, maybe like sometimes going to work and being in those meetings can feel more socially exerting than my like baseline state is. And so I relate to Eunice that like when I come home, I love like turning my brain off. She said like clearing your mind by going on a walk, going on a run. And it feels like in those spaces, like I can find my mental sanity again by being able to just like release anything that the day had previously required of me. Allison also followed up with me on a possible reason why people in Japan have a better recognition of the value and the role that alone time plays. She introduced me to this Japanese term tatame, which directly translates to a built-in front, meaning the facade or the face that you put on when you go out into the world or out into your job for the purpose of pleasing other people, avoiding confrontation. And that could possibly be traced back to this like larger culture of collectivism, like in Eastern culture, but especially in Japan, we see that like this desire to maintain the peace, maintain harmony. And of course, that comes with pros and cons. In contrast, they have this term hone, which translates to true sound, and means like the real feelings that are hidden behind that tatame or behind that front that you put on when you go out there. And so especially in cultures where having that front is important and is a large part of how you spend your life or your waking hours, then maybe people in Japan are more readily appreciative or acknowledging like the need to retreat and like just have that alone time where you can like breathe deep and remove that tatame and like let the real feelings out, or even just like let down your guard a little bit and just be your full like non-performing self. I think generally speaking, the responses to this question on the poll fell into two buckets. One was these activities that provided rest, refresh, recharge. I saw the words like de-stress, like be a degenerate, just like wind down, turn the brain off. And then there was another bucket of using alone time to process the feelings or the thoughts from the day or from social interactions in order to reflect and grow and continue to clear out that space in order to let new things in. Which led me to the question, like, does everyone need alone time? And here was Winnie's response to that.
I do believe everybody needs alone time. And I think that comes down to like, we all come in with a lot of stuff. And if we're in like conversation with people and we're always around people, it gets to be a lot. And it's important that we spend time apart so that we're able to process all the stuff that either the baggage that we're bringing to things or what we have taken on by being in community with others.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I feel highly exposed when I hear we come in with a lot of stuff. And I feel especially like living in New York City or just like a very busy environment, it's so easy for like that stuff to become clutter in my mind if I don't take the time to like take each piece, process it, and then be able to like make sense of it. And something that illuminated this for me was when I was in London. I spent a lot of time like hopping from bookstore to bookstore, and that's something that I enjoy doing like when I have free time, even in New York too. But I noticed a difference that in London, I could go to the bookstore, like open the first book on the shelf and get engulfed and like spend an hour there, spend 2 hours there, and like totally lose track of time. When I was at the hostel, I saw at the lounge, they had like this open library. I picked up like the first book that caught my eye off the shelf, and ended up loving it so much that by the time I ended my stay in London, I was like halfway through that book. When I came back, I bought a copy for myself back here. I was like, oh, I'm going to come back to New York and like, I can't wait to finish this book. But in the past like 2 months or so of being back in New York, I've barely finished another chapter. And I was thinking about like, even though I'm bringing this book around with me, like on my commutes, just like I did in London, I like put it in my backpack and like was reading it on the tube, was reading it like in between things. I did the same here. And yet, because the days are just a little bit or a lot more packed than my time in London, I felt sometimes that like my commutes on the subway were my only reprieve to like be head empty and like do that rest of like the first bucket of alone time, like decompress, turn my brain off, or just process like the information that was already in my brain. Maybe from the day, maybe from earlier that I hadn't yet cleared. And because of that, there wasn't space to take in new information like reading a book. And there have been times too when I've like opened the book, I've read it, and I'm like, I'm not processing this. I'm not taking it in the same way that I was in London because there are so many other thoughts like vying for mental space in my head and like distracting me. And so without like taking the time to first process those things, it was hard to bring in other things as effectively. That said, I started chatting with Dion, my sister, about the difference between processing with people versus processing on our own.
Like for me, sometimes it's like, sometimes when I'm with people, I agree with a lot of things someone might say. And then later I'm like, I actually don't agree with that. I just felt like being a people pleaser. So like for me, sometimes I have to be alone to realize like, oh, that's actually not something I should agree with.
It feels like Dion highlights that there are different roles played in processing alone versus processing with other people. And maybe that depends on like how you're wired as well, or the circumstance, like the one that Dion gave where like she is processing like what people are saying in a group setting and then goes back and thinks about it for herself. And then maybe in that space, her opinion evolves. Whereas Dion mentions later that she's an internal processor. And so there are situations or thoughts where she appreciates spending that time alone first to collect her thoughts, to put them together, and then goes and finds a friend or processes in community. And so they play two different roles for sure. And maybe for like fellow people pleasers like myself, it's easy in like group settings to allow other people's voices or opinions to speak more loudly than our own at times. But then on our own, when we're processing by ourselves, it's easier to pay attention to the thoughts that are genuine to ourselves. Something that Tamara in her Substack blog said was, the unwitnessed self is where the most honest thinking happens. And maybe this ties back to Eunice's thought earlier that like when you're alone, the most raw, naked, unfiltered feelings and thoughts might reappear, which can be scary, but maybe only in that space can we make progress on those thoughts and those feelings that feel jumbled, feel cluttered, feel messy. But when we give the time and the space, starting with this thought and then peeling back like, why did I think that? And then peeling back the intentions under that and slowly like digging up where the roots of those feelings or thoughts come from, like maybe only then can we learn from those feelings and those thoughts and then grow from them in ways that we can't do in like a touch and go or in group settings where we're listening to other people and then ideas are bouncing back and forth. Something that Dion's friend Kevin also mentioned in their car ride was his belief that EQ can only be learned when you're not around other people. When you go back and reflect on the social situation, on how you reacted, on how you responded, and then only from those reflections can you build and grow your skills in going back out and iterating or like evolving how you interact with other people going forward. But all of that is tough. And I think for me, sometimes I struggle with prioritizing alone time because I feel this pressure to like be productive with my time or like move things forward or do things. And maybe that's because there's no like success metric or goalposts or ROI that you can like tangibly measure. For all of my like fellow like optimizing efficiency friends out there, spending time alone, like there's no linear like way to make sense of the progress that you're making. And the timing of that progress can't be controlled either. It's not like a checklist of to-dos to like get through. Unfortunately, our lives and the experiences and the feelings that come with them are not a checklist. But I think of it kind of like a tree. Like you can't tell a tree to grow faster and bear more fruit more efficiently. And you can't bear fruit or grow at all without taking the time to water it and then patiently like wait and see like, do we need more water? Do we need more shade? Do we need more sunlight? And the progress is so slow. And sometimes you see like more leaves fall off in this one season and it looks like you're backsliding and like not making progress. But then over time you see how the tree grows and where the tree bears fruit. And then you learn like which seasons were helpful and productive for that, which environments were the best for growth. And then you learn that like sometimes it's in those waiting seasons where the progress was made like underground, maybe like roots were deepened, for example, that makes the tree stronger for the next season. And in the same way, I think the act of like processing and digging up feelings that we haven't yet processed can feel really uncomfortable and feel like we're going backwards because it's like, oh, why are like these old things coming back out? But in order to grow, we have to sift through and like unpack those things, lay them bare, and then clear the way. And again, I feel like that can be done with other people, but there's a role that processing on your own also takes in order to do some of that digging. And so maybe what it's coming to is that there's a balance to be had. It's not either or, but they're two different aspects of developing yourself. That like you have alone time to a certain degree to allow yourself to process and to rest. And then you have your social to find your belonging, to process with others, to experience things with others. And I think Kevin gives a good example of this.
Sometimes I write 2,500 word food reviews.
Whoa, that's pretty long.
So I have a lot on my mind, and I definitely need the alone time to be able to write it. I would say when I do like drink making stuff, that's pretty solo endeavor for me. In terms of like making drinks, I don't usually work together with other people on that. Like doing these independent hobbies makes me feel really fulfilled as a person because I know I'm doing them myself. And I'm like, I am doing something purely for me. That makes me feel balanced and makes me feel more present for pretty much anything else I do, whether it be other communal hobbies, whether it means work, relationships. In the same way that, like, I don't know, people probably talk about exercise. Like, oh, when I go do exercise, it makes me better in every other aspect of my life.
Something that Kevin and Tamara from the Substack blog also mention are that alone time, maybe because of our social norms or whatever, is an underdeveloped skill, or it's like a muscle, or it's a tool, or Tamara uses the word like it's a language to learn. And so of course, like in the beginning of like learning or developing this muscle, this tool, it's the most uncomfortable, like for any habit that we're building, like it's the most painful. And we also have to take the time, like in the midst of learning the skill, to reflect on what feels most genuine to ourselves. Like for me, I think my personality, like the way that I've been wired is that I'm very easily excitable and I'm very easily distracted. And so like sitting still, like meditating, like praying have always been like disciplines that are really difficult for me. In contrast though, like as a praying person, I pray on my runs, and I would find that like that was my best, like uninterrupted conversation time with God. And so I feel like it's finding the routines of alone time that feel most right to us, but also to not conflate the discomfort with, oh, this is wrong, or this isn't right for me, because maybe we just haven't built that skill or learned the language yet. And so I'm still like practicing. I think I want to be someone who can sit still better, but in whatever way you do it, I think like finding the rest that is truly restful for you when you're alone and when you're in groups, but not just going like towards the group setting because of social pressure. Also recognizing how much alone time versus group time you need, and processing alone too, recognizing like the power that has to allow yourself the space and the time to give like undivided attention to your own thoughts in whatever way like feels most natural. I thought about like the example of like when I was studying in college, if I like needed to study but like didn't really need to study, then I would go to like our student union, which was like where everybody was, and we would just like go there and distract each other, right? But if like the final was the next day or like the essay was due in the morning, then I would go home and like put on my headphones. I had to like block out the noise so that I could focus on making progress in my studying or in my writing of that essay or whatever. And I think in the same way, in order to fully process thoughts well, I need to like have the discipline to give that undivided attention and focus to those things, especially when certain thoughts or feelings have like multiple layers. And usually we don't even know how many layers are like underneath, and like one thought can lead to another, to another. And to that question that I asked like on Instagram and asked friends, does everyone need alone time? The overwhelming majority, like I think around 80% of people responded, yes, everyone needs alone time. And so I think we don't need like stats around loneliness. We don't need stats around like socializing to like feel intrinsically that alone time and people time are equally as valid and like parts of helping us develop ourselves. And so special thanks to all of the people who responded on Instagram. Also special thanks to the people who I DM'd specifically for voice memos or for their honest thoughts on these questions. Dion and Kevin, who I talked to on their car ride very spontaneously. Originally I was like, Dion, what do I talk about for this episode? And we started jamming and I was like, okay, wait, I need to record this. So thank you to Allien and euni and Winnie for your voice memos and your very, very thoughtful thoughts. And thank you to Tamara. I'll link her Substack blog, Alone Finally, into the description for her very eloquent thoughts that inspired a lot of this too. Yeah, So have fun processing this on your next walk or on your subway ride or on your tube ride. Anything that you would like to process with someone else, feel free to drop as comments on YouTube, on Spotify, or DM us anytime. Would love to hear what you think. Okay, do.